moving ahead then, moving into the third model. And so the question I was holding was the question, is there a better way of being with my pain, this kind of chronic pain that I wasn't even aware that perhaps I was exposed to or even accumulating over time. And perhaps that was the reason why I was still where I was on the burnout spectrum, despite practicing the best possible self-care that I could. And so this is a place in Santa Barbara where I love to go, and it's actually a place where I teach quite a bit. It's called La Casa de Maria. And La Casa de Maria is on about 20 acres. Santa Barbara, those of you that don't know it, is north of Los Angeles, and it's a lovely location in the sense that there's mountains, and then they come right down to the ocean, right down to the sea. So the grounds of La Casa de Maria are on the mountainside, and they used to be a sacred grounds, sacred to the local Native American people, the Chumash people, who lived in that area. And so the oak trees, and there are a different kind of oak there to the oak trees, the Irish oak trees or the oak trees we have here in Ireland, in that they're called coastal oaks, live oaks. And they look almost more, the leaf is almost more like a holly leaf. It's kind of shiny, and probably because of the weather there, and the little, instead of the kind of little loops that you see on an oak leaf, have turned into kind of little prickles, so they're more like a holly leaf in some ways, small holly leaf. Anyway, the ground is covered in these live oaks, and you can see that they've been harvested over the years by the Chumash people, in that the branches kind of arch down to the ground, because they used to harvest the acorns and use them for flour. And so there's just this sense, I mention all of that because there's a sense going on the ground there of the land being sort of sacred ground, really a very special place, just the land itself, the location. So one of the things that I've found really fascinating and incredibly personally helpful since I've been in the States has been learning more about Native American ways of life and ceremony and practices, and I've had the opportunity to engage in some of these and found them very rewarding. And through this, I've got to know a particular Indian couple, Wolf and Lisa Wapipa. And Wolf and Lisa were leading a weekend at La Casa de Maria. And I had kind of facilitated their coming here. And they're used to teaching around the fire. You know, they're very traditional. They still teach in a traditional way. It's an oral culture, so they're not used to standing at podiums or sitting in a classroom. So we were all sitting outdoors for the weekend under the oak trees. And on this particular afternoon, they said, we're going to just ask you to go out onto the land this afternoon. And we want you to go out onto the land carrying whatever question is up for you at the moment. And just walk around until you find somewhere that seems to attract your attention. Somewhere you'd like to be, somewhere you'd like to stay, maybe for, and stay there for a couple of hours. So those of you who've heard of Vision Quest, which is one of the Native American practices where you go out into nature for a specific period of time. In some settings, it's 4 days and 4 nights fasting. And on this particular occasion, it was 2 hours. So it was a kind of a little mini version of that. But just going out with your question. And their only instruction to us was find a place, be there, and just be receptive, be open. Don't have any expectations, but just notice and be aware of whatever happens, of whatever comes your way. So I wandered out onto the land, and they smudged us down before we went with white sage, and off we went. And I know the property quite well, so I kind of knew where I wanted to go, and it was there's a little stream running through the east side of the property, and this was kind of in April, so there was still some water running in the stream because it's a dry creek bed in the summer because of the drought usually, but there was still water. And when I got to the stream, I was standing there just listening to the water flowing by, and straight in front of me there was actually a pool, and this is me looking into the pool, and you can see there were trees above, but the water itself was very, very still. And as I was looking into the pool, something caught my attention, something in front of me in the water, and I looked more closely to try and make out what it was, and I could see then that there was this kind of circular structure, and what it was a bird's nest, and there it was sitting in the stream. And it was a big bird's nest, as you can see. I mean, that is probably about maybe 1.5 feet, 2 feet in diameter. And obviously it had fallen from one of the trees over the stream. And it must have just fallen in, because as you can see, there are little bits of wool and hairs and grass and things still attached to it. When I watched it very slowly just standing there, I noticed that even though the pool was very still, the water was actually flowing through, and it was flowing through the nest itself. So the nest was, the weave of the nest was open enough to allow the water to flow through without even causing a ripple. It was just flowing through. So I just noticed this, and I was just kind of, really surprised, and you thought, what an unusual thing. And I also, at that moment, I kind of had just sort of a sense in my, kind of a physical sense of, there was something just that really touched me deeply about this image. I just couldn't, it certainly wasn't at a verbal level that I could put into words. But when I came back to the circle under the oak trees afterwards, and everybody was sitting there, and we went around, and Wolf asked, well, is there anybody like to share anything from, what happened when you were on the land like that? And I just described what had happened, as I've just done, and I said just the words that are kind of going through my mind that came to me were the loose and open weave of the heart. The loose and open weave of the heart. That's the only words I had at that stage. But the image really kind of stayed with me, and it just felt really resonant and really important and valuable, and I didn't know quite why. But and it wasn't a matter of hours or days or weeks, it was kind of more like as kind of months went by, I began to wonder, was this the outline of another way of being with pain? So the ways I knew of being with pain were the heroic way, what we sometimes call the medical model, where we treat or retreat, as in fight or flight. It's outwardly focused, externally, objectively focused. The emphasis here is on information, expertise, technology. It's essentially a power over, power down kind of way of doing things. And it's hugely successful. This is what makes us better when we've got acute appendicitis or a ruptured appendix. This is what makes us better when we fracture our femur. This is what makes us better when we're diabetic and we need insulin. So the heroic model is a wonderful model in certain circumstances where there's a problem that can be fixed. But there are many problems, and especially in the work we all in this room do, where we're dealing with people who aren't getting better, people who are grieving their life, and relatives who are grieving their loved one, the sort of pains and suffering that can't be fixed, where we need another way of being with pain. And I had learned another way of being with pain over time, and that was what I would call the wounded healer way of being with pain, or a term that you're probably all familiar with. But this is if you like, this comes close to the psychological model of self-care we were talking about earlier: mindfulness, self-knowledge, self-compassion. But the essence here is we're being present. We're not fixing because we can't fix, but we're holding, we're waiting. And as well as an external focus, there's also an inner focus. And there's somehow trusting that this is valuable, even though in the moment it doesn't feel anything like it. It might feel uncomfortable because the other person is still looking to us for help and expecting us to help. But the wounded healer believes, has a trust, I should say, that we all have within us an innate healing capacity, an innate healing potential. Just as we cut our hand and we keep it clean, 2 months' time we can't even see a scratch. The body has healed itself. And our psyche is part of our body. They're not separate things. And so our psyche also has that capacity. But what I'm pointing to here is the capacity. The capacity is of innate healing. And what we're doing in the wounded healer model is we're holding, we're being present to, we're staying with, we're trusting in that capacity in the other, knowing that can bring about a sort of an internal shift, an internal realignment. And it's a much more egalitarian model than the heroic model. So there's a time and a place for the wounded healer model. But I began to see that what the Nest in the Stream is offering me is another model of another way of being with pain and another model of self-care. And I'm going to call this the spiritual model. And I'm going to talk briefly about the different aspects of the spiritual model of self-care as I've been reflecting on it. Connection with nature, feeling the pain, releasing the pain, and doing so for the welfare of all, not just for our own sake. So let me say a little bit about each of these. What do I mean by connecting with nature? Well, the nest is in the stream. It's not up in the tree anymore. It's actually in the stream. That's what's kind of unusual about it, is that nests shouldn't be in streams. Nests should be, on dry land, or at least, are up in a tree. So it's like as though my attention was being called to this unusual image, but really emphasizing immersion in the natural flow of things. So what I mean by nature connection or connecting with nature, it's a process of sensory attention to a natural process or being. And it's a form of mindfulness, really, because mindfulness is essentially about paying attention to sensation, the sensations of breath. Here we're paying attention maybe through our hearing, through our visual, through our tactile, maybe even through our taste or our smell, to our external environment. But we're doing this with an attitude, a particular attitude, an attitude of respect, of open receptivity. And there are inner ways of connecting with nature, as in mindfulness of breathing, and there are outward ways, as in actually spending time on the land in the way I described, but doing so in a very mindful, sensory sort of way. And what does nature connection do? Well, nature connection helps us to remember who we are. And I'm going to go quickly through this, even though what I'm going to take you through here in the next very quick 10 slides or so is, as I understand it, the sort of realization that Gautama Siddhartha, who became known as the Buddha, discovered when he sat under the tree all that time, and he suddenly had a moment of insight. And what he saw was that we think we're separate. We think we're solid, separate individuals that interact with our world a bit like billiard balls do, in a kind of a linear, interactive way. This is the so-called delusion of separateness. What native elders, what mystics of all great spiritual traditions, what physicists are telling us more and more is that we're more like waves. Yes, we have our individuality, but we're not separate, we're not disconnected. If you were to look through the cross-section of one of those waves, it wouldn't look like this. It would look a lot more like this. And we're a lot more porous, and we're a lot more fluid than we think. We're a lot more process than we are static. We're relational. Just as waves are relational with each other, so we are relational with our environment, with others. We're interactive and interdependent. Our feeling, our being is dependent on our relationships and our interaction and our interdependency. What the Buddha calls mutual co-arising or mutual conditioning. So, very briefly, we're more happenings than we are things. So that's the first thing, that connection with nature, real connection with nature, can wake us up to, help us to realize. The second thing, it allows us to realize that nature itself is not, it's not like we're the only sentient beings around. There are others. There's the trees, there's the birds. It's all alive, it's all intelligent, it's all connected, it's all relatives, as the logos goes for pioneers. And as we realize this, not just in a conceptual way, but in an experiential, visceral kind of a way, as we realize this, we begin to experience another kind of power. I mean, I sometimes think of it as a kind of an incredible sort of spiritual transfusion of energy. I mean, talk about an antidote, for me anyway, to burnout, is that sort of nature connection, coming into a deep sense of belonging and kinship. And what comes from that, as I realize how interdependent I am, and how animate a world I'm living in, is awakening of a caring and a desire to do what I can to relieve another's suffering. So it enhances that desire. The second part to the spiritual model can feel quite counterintuitive, because who wants to really feel their pain? People come to us every day asking us to take their pain away. So what's this about feeling the pain? Well, it seems when it comes to grief, it seems when it comes to heart pain, that we can't bypass it to get to the other side. We somehow have to be with the experience to come through it. As I say, why would anyone want to do this? Well, again, a number of wisdom traditions tell us that paradoxically, healing is sometimes found where we least expect it, in the wound, in the pain, in the suffering. Our own Saint Fintan is alleged to have said, "May you have the commitment to know what has hurt you, to allow it come closer to you, and in the end to become one with you." So that's the kind of paradoxical wisdom we're talking about. Or the Sufi poet Rumi says, your defects are the way that glory gets manifested. Whoever sees clearly what's diseased in himself begins to gallop on the way. Self-complacency blocks the workmanship. Don't turn your head. Keep looking at the bandaged place. That's where the light enters you. And Leonard Cohen's version of that, which many of you will know, ring the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. There's a crack in everything. That's where the light gets in. And so that's why there's a certain wisdom in actually allowing ourselves drop into the experience of pain. And into the felt sense of it. So we're not just noticing that there's some pain in our body or pain in our hearts, but we're actually, even for a few moments, we're allowing ourselves to feel what we're feeling, to suffer what we're suffering. Okay, looks like we're running out of power here. Maybe it's telling me I'm going to burn out the computer. So I just wanted to highlight this idea of the felt sense. Eugene Gendling, who wrote a lot about an approach called focusing, describes it. He says, first, feel your body. Your body can, of course, be felt from the outside, but I'm asking you to feel it from the inside. The felt sense is a special kind of internal bodily awareness, a bodily felt, implicitly rich sense of some situation, problem, or aspect of your life. The felt sense is the holistic, implicit bodily sense of a complex situation. So it's for just a few moments allowing yourself to be with that sense of pain that you're carrying. Oops. And then the third step is actually releasing it. So it's not about glorifying it, it's not about indulging it, it's about feeling what you're feeling, but then letting it go. Just like the stream is flowing through the nest, letting it go into the flowing through of the deeper stream. And so the practice here is that we have a choice. We can choose to hold on or we can choose to release, to let go of, to let go to, without expectation of outcome. And remembering that there's a healing power in surrender. Henry Miller, the great American novelist, wrote one of his books called The Colossus at Marousi, where he traveled around Greece and he came to Epidaurus in the Peloponnese. And he had a sort of an epiphany experience when he arrived at Epidaurus. And here's how he described it. He said, "At Epidaurus, in the stillness, in the great peace that came over me, I heard the heart of the world beat. I know what the cure is. It's to give up, to relinquish, to surrender, so that our little hearts can beat in unison with the great heart of the world." So that's that step of releasing and letting go. And as I say, we let go not just for our sake, but for the sake of all beings. The Buddhist term for this is bodhicitta. And bodhicitta is described by Buddhist scholar Joanna Macy as the overarching yearning for the welfare of all beings. Bodhicitta arises from deep connection, from really realizing our interbeing, our interconnectedness. And when we release our pain, we're not releasing a concept or a thought. We're releasing energy. What is pain? It's energy. If we're holding on to it, even without being aware that we're doing so, we're kind of hoarding it in a way. So actually, in releasing our pain, we're releasing energy back into the web of life. The more connected we are, the more we care. The more we care, the more we want to do all we can to relieve the suffering and promote the happiness of those we care for. So this is a model that I now practice, and I practice it at the bedside. It's part of my routine, and it's not something that comes up at any particular time of any particular day, but it comes when I realize I've just experienced something really painful, or I don't know what that was about, and I leave perhaps the room and I find a quiet spot, or it may be something that I do in a conversation. It can happen in the moment. So in practice, what this looks like is I take three deep mindful breaths, actually being with the felt sense of the breath, that internal bodily sense of the sensations of breathing. As I continue to breathe, I notice whatever pain is in my heart, in that kind of central area of the chest around the heart. I just notice what that physically is going on there. Maybe there's nothing there. Maybe there's a numbness. Maybe there's an ache. Maybe there's a tightness. Whatever it is, I notice it. And then with the next exhale, I just allow myself to drop into that, and just for a few moments, allow myself to feel what I'm feeling. Then I kind of let that be as I bring my attention back to the sensation of the breath, and with 3 mindful exhales, I release the pain. and I do so for the sake of all beings. So that's the practice, for me, what it looks like at the bedside. So, in conclusion, and apologies, I've gone on longer than I expected there, but in conclusion, when it comes to the three different models, and if the practical model is about holding our breath, if the psychological model is about learning to breathe underwater or breathing in before we breathe out, the spiritual model of self-care is offering us another way. And in terms of the water metaphor, it's by becoming the flow-throughs. We already are. It's not about becoming something different. This is who we are. And it's about remembering that. So thank you. So I'd like to pause here. We have just 20 minutes left. So what I'd like to do is just take 5 minutes for any comments, questions, and then I'm going to actually pose some questions to you to kind of reflect on and talk with your partner about.